The Middle East sits in uneasy silence, its cities and landscapes bearing the weight of recent violence. The air is thick with tension, as if the region itself is holding its breath, waiting to see what comes next. Just days ago, a brief but brutal 12-day war between Iran and Israel erupted in June 2025, leaving devastation in its wake. The scars of conflict are fresh: shattered buildings, smoldering ruins, and families displaced from their homes. This was no proxy conflict fought in the shadows. For the first time in decades, Iran and Israel clashed directly, unleashing a storm of violence that left over 1,000 dead and countless more wounded. The pain and trauma ripple through communities, with survivors struggling to make sense of the destruction. The ceasefire that began on June 24th is fragile, a mere pause in hostilities, not a true peace. Both sides are battered and wary, their militaries on high alert, watching each other across tense borders. The sense of uncertainty is palpable. The war began suddenly with a sweeping Israeli bombing campaign. Their jets struck deep into Iranian territory, targeting top commanders and nuclear scientists. The attacks not only killed key figures but also derailed nuclear negotiations that were scheduled to resume just days later, plunging diplomatic efforts into chaos. Israel's airstrikes crippled Iran's air force, destroying vital airbases and much of its aging fleet. Military analysts confirmed the scale of the damage, noting that Iran's ability to defend its skies has been severely diminished, leaving the country vulnerable and its leadership shaken. Around the world, people watched in fear as the skies above Iran became a battleground. Newsrooms buzzed with urgent updates, and families gathered around televisions, anxious that the conflict might spiral into a wider regional war. Now the international community is racing to transform this fragile truce into a lasting peace. Diplomats shuttle between capitals, trying to bridge the deep mistrust that lingers. The core issues remain unresolved, especially Iran's nuclear ambitions, which continue to cast a long shadow over any hope for stability. For now, the guns are silent and the battlefields lie empty. But beneath the surface, tensions simmer, and everyone knows that this uneasy calm could shatter at any moment, plunging the region back into chaos. The US entered the conflict with overwhelming force, launching a series of highly coordinated targeted strikes on Iran's most critical nuclear sites: Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. These facilities, long at the heart of Iran's nuclear ambitions, were chosen for their strategic importance and the potential to cripple Iran's nuclear capabilities in a single decisive blow. The world watched as military jets streaked across the desert skies, and explosions lit up the night, signaling a new phase in the confrontation. The strikes unfolded over 2 tense days, June 21st and 22nd, marking a turning point in the conflict and sending shockwaves through the international community. The aftermath was dramatic. The targeted facilities suffered extensive damage, with plumes of smoke rising from the ruins. President Trump, addressing the world, declared the strikes a permanent setback for Iran's nuclear program, insisting that the regime's ambitions had been dealt a crippling blow. Yet, even as he claimed victory, Trump acknowledged a sobering reality. Iran could attempt to rebuild its program elsewhere in secret, making the outcome far from certain and the victory incomplete. The bombings managed to seal off large quantities of enriched uranium at the targeted sites, preventing immediate use. But not all nuclear material was destroyed. Some resources may have been moved or hidden before the attacks, leaving lingering concerns about what remains unaccounted for. Iran's initial defiance in the face of the strikes soon faded. President Pezeshkian, appearing visibly shaken, later admitted that the sites were lost, confirming the devastating impact of the US operation and signaling a rare moment of vulnerability for the Iranian leadership. The destruction of these facilities has dramatically shifted the strategic landscape. While the immediate threat posed by these sites is gone, the risk that Iran could rebuild its program in secret at undisclosed locations has only grown. Now, the US and its allies face a far more difficult intelligence challenge, tracking a potentially dispersed and deeply hidden nuclear effort, one that could evade detection for years. Compared to this new reality, the old monitoring regime, where inspectors had access to known sites, seems almost simple and straightforward. The nuclear question has become more complex, not less, and the world now faces a future where the stakes, and the uncertainty, are higher than ever before. In the wake of airstrikes and ceasefire, diplomacy is clouded by confusion and mixed signals from Washington and Tehran. Both sides publicly dispute who called for renewed talks, each wary of appearing weak after the violence. Rumors swirl of indirect negotiations in Oslo, but nothing is confirmed, highlighting the sensitivity and mistrust on both sides. Domestic politics make concessions risky, so leaders rely on vague language and back channels to test the waters. Western officials suspect Iran is stalling, appearing open to talks to avoid new strikes, while resisting U.S. demands for a total halt to uranium enrichment. For Iran, entering talks is a gamble. It must show strength at home while signaling just enough flexibility to keep war at bay. This diplomatic ambiguity keeps the world guessing. The path to real negotiations remains uncertain. Leaders in Iran, the US, and Israel are sending a flurry of mixed messages, each statement adding to the growing uncertainty about the region's future. As the world watches, the rhetoric from Tehran, Washington, and Tel Aviv seems to shift almost daily, making it difficult for analysts and citizens alike to predict what might come next. The stakes are high, and every word uttered by these leaders is scrutinized for hidden meaning or signals of escalation. Iran's President Pezeshkian, during a high-profile interview on American television, called for renewed dialogue and a reduction in hostilities. Yet in the same breath he accused Israel of orchestrating an assassination attempt against him, and issued a stern warning to former President Trump about the dangers of dragging the region into what he called forever wars. Pezeshkian's words reflect both a desire for peace and a deep mistrust of his adversaries, leaving the world to wonder which path Iran will ultimately choose. In Washington, Trump is quick to claim the recent airstrikes as a decisive victory for American strength, using the moment to rally his supporters and project confidence. However, behind the scenes, ongoing talks with Israeli officials reveal that the threat of further conflict is far from over. The administration is walking a tightrope, balancing public displays of power with the reality of a region on edge. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, during his visit to the White House, remains as hawkish as ever. He refuses to rule out the possibility of targeting Iran's supreme leader directly, and continues to push for even more aggressive action if Iran attempts to rebuild its nuclear program. Netanyahu's stance is uncompromising, signaling to both allies and adversaries that Israel is prepared to act alone, if necessary. Meanwhile, U.S. officials are dropping hints that they might support further Israeli strikes if Iran moves its uranium stockpiles or restarts its nuclear program. The message is clear. Any sign of renewed nuclear activity could trigger a swift and forceful response, raising the specter of a broader conflict. The threat of renewed military action looms over every diplomatic effort, making each round of talks a high-stakes gamble. Diplomacy is now a game played under the shadow of war, where a single misstep could have devastating consequences for millions. Each side's public statements are a careful mix of threats and offers, designed to keep their opponents guessing and their own populations reassured. The result is a constant state of tension, with the world holding its breath for the next development. In the end, the fate of the region is being shaped as much by the words and posturing of its leaders as by their actions on the ground. The world waits, hoping that dialogue will prevail over conflict, but knowing that the future remains as unpredictable as ever. Despite airstrikes and pressure, Iran refuses to halt uranium enrichment or missile production, seeing them as vital to its security. This hardline stance blocks diplomatic progress, clashing with U.S. and Israeli demands for total nuclear dismantlement. The IAEA reports Iran kept expanding its program even during past talks, fueling Western distrust. After the conflict, hardliners in Iran grow bolder. Some call for seizing enemy cargo in the Strait of Hormuz and enriching uranium to weapons-grade levels. The Iranian parliament has even moved to authorize closing the strait, threatening global oil supplies. Iran's message: it will meet pressure with pressure, raising the stakes for everyone. The world faces a more defiant, unpredictable Iran. The US-Iran standoff is just one flashpoint in a region on edge. The Red Sea has become a new hotspot, with Chinese naval harassment and Houthi attacks on shipping escalating tensions. On July 7th, Houthis attacked a commercial vessel, killing crew and showing their reach despite international patrols. Intelligence points to Houthi cells using island bases for these raids, threatening global trade. Meanwhile, the US has shifted its Syria policy, removing terror designations and easing sanctions, a move that could reshape regional alliances. Iran's network of proxies from Yemen to Syria gives it leverage far beyond its borders. The region is a chessboard, Every move, from Red Sea attacks to Syria policy, affects the whole. The risk of wider conflict is ever present. The roots of today's crisis lie in the collapse of the 2015 nuclear deal, the JCPOA. The agreement traded limits on Iran's nuclear program for sanctions relief, with strict inspections to block a bomb. Critics, especially in the US and Israel, argued the deal was temporary and ignored Iran's missiles and proxies. In 2018, President Trump withdrew from the deal, reimposing sanctions and shattering the agreement. Iran responded by ramping up enrichment and breaking deal terms, while Europe failed to deliver promised economic relief. This history of broken promises fuels mistrust, making a new agreement even harder. Hardliners in Tehran now argue the US can't be trusted, deepening the impasse. The world stands at a crossroads: diplomacy or renewed war. Secret talks may yet happen, but both sides would need to make painful concessions. Iran accepting tougher nuclear limits, the US offering real sanctions relief. If talks fail, the ceasefire could collapse, triggering new strikes and Iranian retaliation through proxies or attacks on shipping. A wider war would devastate the region, disrupt global oil, and create a humanitarian crisis. The stakes are enormous: thousands of lives, millions displaced, and a global recession if the Strait of Hormuz closes. Desperate efforts for diplomacy continue, but hardliners on all sides prepare for the worst. The coming weeks will decide if the region steps back from the brink or plunges into chaos. The choices made now will shape the future, for the Middle East and the world.